Hi class, Jolene here. Let's take a look at previous student work for the logo and stationery package for your lesson 3. So let's take a look at this, students. Take a look at the brainstorm. And then we start to see some, once the students has decided on a name, Wired Games, we start to see experimentation with the shapes of letters and type. If you're planning to include type as part of the logo, and most of the times we do for logos. And then you can see here combining letters, and then we move over to some comps for that logo. And I'm going to move around a little bit here. It might make you dizzy. Here is the stationery. I'm going to turn on the guides so you can see there's lots of guides involved in this one, and it might make your eyes a little buggy, but you kind of just have to get used to it. You're going to want to have a center guide. I believe it's a 1/4-inch guide on the outsides. Make sure your logo is centered if that's where you want it, or it's butted up against the 1/4-inch guides over on one side or another. And then the other information can be centered along the top. You'll see there's going to be lots of variations for where things are placed on the letterhead. That's what this is, the letterhead. Let me turn those guides off again. And this is all the area where a letter would be typed. So you want to make sure you keep this area nice and clear. So that's where the letter can go. And then here's how this student did the horizontal and vertical logo. You can see it has all the required elements, the name of the person whose card it is, their title, a phone number, email, web address, and physical address. Those are all the required elements. And then this is the number 10 envelope. Again, I'll turn the guides on. You can see how, in this case, the logo is snugged right up against the corner of these guides and then down in the bottom. That's a really good way to do it. Again, you're going to want to leave this area all blank. This is where the recipient's address would go, right here. Let's take a look at another one. Brainstorm. In this case, this person, she herself was a fine artist, and she needed a logo for her fine art studio. So that's what she's experimenting with here, with different shapes, different fonts, narrowing it down through the comp process. And then finally, here's her letterhead. This is a nice way to do the address down at the bottom. You can use bullets to separate, since you're running it all the information all together. You can use a bullet to separate it. And just a refresher for how you get bullets, you go to type and glyphs, and then depending on which font you're using, there's lots of different fonts. You want to normally use the font that's associated with the type that you're already using, and then double click and it'll put that bullet in there for you. The reason it didn't before was because I didn't have a type box selected yet. So let's try it again with the type selected. Then I'm going to go to type and glyphs and then double click here, and there's that bullet. And then here's the number 10 envelope and the horizontal and vertical cards. So you can see that the vertical card takes on a completely different style, but both work really well. And this is something you want to give your client a choice of, a vertical or a horizontal. Let's see what else we have. All right, this is for a company that does web design and graphics. So you can see here again, lots of experimentation with letters, type. Note that the reason you can't see this is because this student forgot to create outlines on this type, so it's just raw type. So we can't see what that type actually looks like because I don't have that font. Okay, here's more roughs. We get over to the comp stage, at least 6 different comps, different variations using all the same elements, different ways of presenting the type, both the type styles and the placement of the type. And then ultimately, this is what this student chose, this design. You can see here that she's put it in the 2 boxes provided, including a 1-inch box. This one's a little bit tight. I'm looking at this at 200%. You can tell from right there how how much you have the what you're seeing on the screen magnified. So this is at 200%. If I take it back down to 100%, see it's at 100 now. That's a little bit, the type is a little bit challenging to read, but it's pretty darn good. And by the way, you can delete those boxes behind it once you put it in there. It's going to be in the template layer. So if I unlock that layer and then click here and delete that and delete this, see it makes a much nicer presentation for what you're going to be turning in. Then here you see this student put the logo up in the top left corner, put some of the critical information like the website for a company that does web design. You want that nice front and center, and the phone number the same way. And then here you see she's used an element from it, as kind of a watermark in the middle of the letterhead. And the way you do that is you place it there and then decrease the opacity. See, you can see the opacity is at only 16% here. And then that way, when a letter is put on top of it, see, you can still read the type for the letter perfectly fine. And then you have that branding behind it. Take that back out. And then here is this student's work for the business card, both vertical and horizontal. And you can see on the horizontal one, she clipped out part of the design. So we just see a part of it, but we see definitely enough of it to know what it is. We can tell it's a light bulb, and we can tell it's a box. So therefore the idea box, that works really well. So this is the kind of experimentation I'd like to see, trying this in different ways. And then here's the letterhead. Rather than putting the address down at the bottom like you've seen in other examples, it's put right up here, right snugged right up next to the logo, but with nice amount of white space in between. So that's done really well. Here's another one. Lots of experimentation here. I am not sure how to pronounce this word. It's, I think, a Spanish word, perhaps. But as you'll see, it has to do with this. Maybe this is a cocoa bean. And so here's all kinds of experimentation with shapes, the way to present them, with type. Again, this student forgot to create outlines on their type, so I can't see what this looks like. Here are a bunch of experimentation with comps, showing it in different ways, different positions, different colors, and different fonts. This is an excellent example of what comps should look like. And then this is the one that this student finally chose. It's simply placed in the middle with the name right below it, a line that diminishes off to the sides. By the way you can do that is having your line selected and line, or stroke, it's also called. Here's the stroke palette. So you can go here and find other fonts to use and change the way, not other fonts, other strokes, and choose the way that stroke behaves. You can add different things to a stroke here. The other way you can do something like this is to go to the brushes panel. So go to Window and Brushes, and then you can choose the way different brushes look here. And if you're not seeing something that you like, go to Open Brush Library, and there's lots of things to choose from and experiment with here. I'm going to do Command Z to back out of that. Also, the place where you change the size to increase or decrease the size of the stroke is right here. You can also do that from the strokes panel, which I showed you just a bit ago. You can change the stroke from here. And then here's the business cards. Yeah, one thing I would say about this is that you do want the name to be bigger than probably just about anything else, but this is a little bit too big because we don't have a nice pathway of white space for our eye to move through right here. So I would make that maybe about like that. It's still big, it's still prominent, but now we have this nice negative space or white space here. All this is looking pretty good. You can see that this has the opacity has been lowered to 50%, so the black type on top of it is still very readable. By the way, when you do addresses, you don't need to, if you stack it like this, you don't need to have the comma at the end. The only time you need to use the comma is if you're running it all along in a row. So you'd want to reposition that line, but without the comma. Same way here, don't need that comma there. But otherwise, this looks really nice with the logo here and the address right below it. So I think that's like a third way that we've seen how you can set up the number 10 envelope. Let's look at another one. Lots of good work on the brainstorm roughs and comps. This is where you can see here that some of the type was, the raw type was moved over onto the side, copies made of it. And here we can see what that type was meant to look like by this graphic artist, because outlines were created after it was copied and moved over. This is the way to do it. Here's one that he or she missed. So we can't see what the design of this type is supposed to look like, but we can see all the other ones. So that's good. And then turn the guides off so you can see this. This is the logo, and here it is again down in the 1-inch square to make sure that it reads well that way. Again, you can delete these two boxes once you've put them in there. And then here's the letterhead, and she's just used some kind of soft strokes here. That's done with a brush stroke, with the brush tool, which is the paintbrush tool, which is right here, just to add a little bit more interest to it. That design is carried through on all the other elements. You can see everything is flush left here. You don't need the address in both places. It should be in one or the other, either up here or down here or next to it. You can see here we run into a little bit of a problem with the lack of contrast. This type is difficult to read on top of that. So the way to solve that is to lower the opacity here, or perhaps use a different color here so that it can be seen. In this case, the student created the back of a card too. You do not need to do this. This was just something this student felt like doing, But on the back of these business cards, she just put the logo, which is a nice touch. But again, not necessary. You're not going to get extra points for it. You're not going to get marked down for it. But it's really nice for your portfolio to do those extra kinds of things if you have time. Here's another one for a comics company. This is also a good example of creating type. Here's the raw type off to the side, moving it to the side, and then creating outlines on this type. So you can see, I can see the design of the type because outlines have been created on it. Now we have lots of comp and roughs and comps, mostly roughs over here. And now we get to the comp stage, trying that design in at least 6 different ways. And then this is the one that was chosen. Now here, since Sterling Comics is part of the logo, you don't, if it's nice and readable, and this is, you don't really need to repeat it with plain type here. Just put the address in there. Let's see. And yeah, so they put the address up at the top here, which is fine, and then all the other information down at the bottom. And this works well too. And by the way, this might be something new to get to you. Instead of using a bullet to divide this information that's all in a row, this student used what's called a fence post. I'll show you how that's created. I'll just create a little bit of type, and then that symbol you'll find on your keyboard. It's right above the backslash key and to the right of the bracket keys, and it looks like that. So you can use that to divide things. It's called a fence post. Sometimes you can make them different colors to make it even more obvious that there's a division there. Then here's the number 10 envelope. Again, don't really need the name of the company right here because it's already here in the logo. Here's the business cards. If you're going to put type inside a rectangle like this, make the rectangle bigger so that you have plenty of white space or negative space around the edges. See, something more like that, which might mean that maybe you want this to go all the way to the edge like this, and then you have plenty of white space around it. You might be wondering about this grid pattern that's on here. This is, some students like working with grids. They feel like it helps them line things up. The way you get to grids, if you want to use it, is to go to View, and in this case, I'm going to click on Hide Grid to make it come back, Show Grid. And it's just like guides in that you can toggle the grid on and off by clicking on Control or Command, comma. That turns it on and off. I'm going to turn the guides off too so you can see this better. Here's an example of brainstorm experimentation with the letters M and R, other shapes, and then starting to refine those shapes for the comps. And then this is the final design. So you can see here those fence posts that I mentioned earlier. This is exactly the way it should be set up. Notice that there is a comma after street here and after El Cajon, and that's because it's all run together in one line. This is done exactly right here also. And then here are the business cards. Again, you can see fence posts are used to divide the information. And I'm not sure what happened here, why Yeah, this type, when it's at 100%, it's kind of hard to read. So make sure you look at your work at 100% and or print it out so you can see how it looks when it's printed out. That's very telling once you print it out and you're seeing it in the actual way it's going to be presented, and it might affect the fonts and other design choices that you make. Here's another one. This student had so much experimentation, she went off to the sides. Let me get rid of these guides. Well, this is where she used type with the logo. So she just took all of this, made copies, and put it off to the side. And so you can see all this has the raw type, and all this is the type that has the outlines. So we can see what the real design looks like on these comps. And here's the final. In this case, this person used square bullets to divide the information. That works really well. I might have even chosen to make those a different color. By the way you can pick a different color from one that you already have is to click on something. Now you can see there's the fill color, and then I'm going to get the eyedropper and click right here till it changes that fill to that color. And now you can see that object is that color. So that might be a nice design element that you've carried down from the top to the bottom to change the color to all the same color of green that goes right along with the whole idea of the Granny Smith apple color that was chosen for that reason, because that's pretty much the color of a Granny Smith apple. Notice how there is no letter G, not an actual letter G, but the apple is used to create that shape and then incorporate it in. This is a really good idea. So you know how I had changed the color of the square bullets? Again, if you do that on the letterhead or in one place, carry it through to the whole design, everywhere that you're going to use those bullets to just keep bringing that branding forward. Here's another one for a climbing company. I'll take us straight to the logo design here. So you can see an uppercase V was made a lot larger, and then a very simple shape of a person climbing as part of it. So how did they go from this type to this? Well, here's how you do that. I may have shown you before, but it's a good time to show it again. Let me get on a layer that I can work on because that layer was locked. So if I type the word vertical in all uppercase, and I'm going to make it bigger so you can see it. Now I'm going to make a copy of it, and now I'm going to convert this to outlines. Type, create outlines. I use the shortcut, which is Shift and Control and the letter O. That's the shortcut for doing that. Now I'm going to go to Object and Ungroup. So each one of these is a separate layer. It's on a separate layer, and it's a separate graphic element. Now I can select just that V, hold down the corner, and make it much larger. Now I move it in about like this, so there's about the same amount of spacing between each layer. And that's the way you can manipulate your type for dramatic effect. And then here is the business cards. This is a really good idea. When you're using a phone and fax number, make the letters bold on phone and fax. So when the person who's holding this card is just looking at it at a glance and they just need the phone number, it's very obvious where it is. So see how we can use type for wayfinding, for helping people making it real easy for people to find things by the way we guide their eye. Another design, look at all these comps, all these different ways of working with the letter M and D for Mary's Decor. And again, you can remove these pieces from your final design after you have them in there, so it's a nicer presentation. You can see here that a watermark was placed here. Let's see what percentage this is. This student must have done it in a different way than using the opacity, and I'm not sure how she did it, but it is much lighter. Again, that just elements of that design kind of swirl around in the background here. This is a really nice way of doing this. Let me see if I can zoom in on that. Or I'm triple clicking. Let me see if I, oh, there it was. Yeah, see, it's only at 6%, that background design. So the rest of the design laying on top of it is still very easy to read. And it doesn't look cluttered. And here she's tried one without a background design. Again, a really good way to present two different ways of doing it for your client. In this case, adding the name Mary's Decor below the logo here, you do need that because it's not, it's part of the design. And here's one more. You can see here experimentation with lots of different elements. I think this student did this for her son or daughter's lacrosse team. See here, see this is an excellent example of comps done in different ways. And then here's the final. You can see the information for the address, the required information is all down at the bottom. Here, this student has chosen to use stars for bullets that you can make yourself and then carefully place right in the center. And then they even added kind of a tagline, outplay, outwork, outlast, as part of the stationery, part of the branding. Here is the vertical card. For some reason, there's no horizontal card. And here's how the envelope is done. All right, now we're going to take a look at just a few where things are not done as well. And it mostly has, and for this one, it has to do with a couple of things. One, this logo is really hard to read. When you see it in the 1-inch square, you can't read the type at all. The other thing that's happened is that this student stretched the logo to fit inside this rectangle that I've provided. You don't want to, just like you don't want to stretch type, you don't want to stretch a logo either. So you can see that it was designed to be round. So I'm going to delete that, grab this one, make a copy, put it over here, try to get it approximately in the center, and then you can see when I make it bigger, it stays round, and then you can delete that outside line. So all of this is really hard to read. This is not a good font for what goes on a business card. A plainer font is typically better. It's all crammed together. Look, there's hardly any space. There is no space between these two lines of type and these lines of type. That is just irritating, difficult to read. Plus, all this information should be separated into pieces of information that go together. So these two go together, make them separate. There's no name of the person on this. That should You don't really need to put Rita's Diner here because you have it in the logo already. However, it's hard to read. So that's a double whammy bad problem. This piece of information should probably go with that. Move this up here. Maybe move the phone number up here. So this is still not great, but now we have information divided in pieces. We have white space in between. It's a lot easier to read. Let's take a look at another one that has well, just one problem. It's actually a really good design, but notice that the web services piece of type here, it's a different distance apart from this circle where the W is and where the E is. So that's because the student has used upper and lowercase letters. I recommend you use all uppercase letters when you're going to do this so you don't have that gap. It's technically correct, but it looks kind of funny, that gap there. Otherwise, this is done very nicely. You don't need to leave this piece of type in there for your presentation. Turn that layer off when you turn it in. That's just put there to let you know where the recipient's address is going to go. Here, student forgot to create outlines on the type, and this logo is pretty difficult to read when it's in the 1-inch square. So always test in the 1-inch square to make sure that it's still readable. And that's some do's and don'ts for lesson 3, the logo and stationery package.